Okay, so a number of details have emerged from this terrorist attack on London Bridge that some of them certainly raise eyebrows. I'm going to get into those in a second, but first of all, I think it's worth talking a little bit about why it is that terrorist attacks get so much attention as opposed to um, other incidents involving death. So, for example, if there'd been a car crash yesterday with two people killed, um, it would probably have got some headlines online, and that would be it. It certainly wouldn't be dominating newspaper covers. I think the reason that terrorism gets so much focus is because it is a deliberate act of human evil. And yes, I do use the word evil. And it is that aspect that I think is particularly alarming. I think it is also the fact there is ideology involved, and I think of the fact it's just indiscriminate, which again differentiates it somewhat from knife crime. I mean, of course, there are innocent victims of knife crime and people who are bystanders and so on, but there's something about terrorism I think is particularly poignant in that sense. Its indiscriminate nature. I mean, the chances of dying in a terrorist attack in the United Kingdom are extremely low, even in London. I mean, it's a city of almost 9 million and two people died, not including the terrorist himself. So I do think it's important to put things in context, but at the same time, there is a real problem in terms of people who want to do society harm. And I don't intend this video to be an in-depth, deep sort of psychological analysis of pan-Islamism, but I do think it is critical that pan-Islamism is part of the discussion. It's no good having the same sort of routine. Oh, we condemn terrorism, it's terrible, pray for the victims and move on. I think the only way to tackle any problem is by addressing its cause, its ideology. And in this case, ISIS has claimed responsibility, and it would appear this is an Islamist attack. Most terrorist incidents in Europe involving fatalities, the majority have been Islamist. That's not to say there isn't a problem with the far right, there is, um, but most of the fatalities have come from Islamist attacks. So people need to acknowledge that. There needs to be no censoring of it. There needs to be no whataboutery or obfuscation. That's what it is. That's a mentality. Of course, it's terrorism, but I get really frustrated when I see people more interested in trying to distance Islamist terrorists from Islam than they are about actually tackling the problem. Like they're more concerned about the image of Islam. Um, Islamic extremism is part of Islam, right? And it's no good saying, oh, they're not real Muslims, they're nothing to do with Islam. They might be distorting the Quran, they might be taking it out of context, and they may. But I get really frustrated with this because to me, it's politically correct nonsense. You have to call a problem for what it is. Islamic extremism is part of Islam, just like Christian fundamentalism is part of Christianity. And if Muslims who take issue with that cannot just accept what is obvious, then I mean these people are not, acting in the name of Buddhism or Jedi warriors. They are acting in the name of Islam. Whether they're good Muslims or not is beside the point. This notion that Muslims can't be terrorists is absurd. But anyway, that's it's blatantly obvious. But regarding this case itself, the big talking point is about Usman Khan's early release, and it is turned into a blame game. Boris Johnson was today blaming Labour because it was under the Brown administration that this policy was introduced in 2008. However, as Corbyn pointed out, it's cuts to the parole service that are also at play here. I mean, it's so good Johnson saying he's only been in power for 120 days because his party has been in power for 9 years. So really, I think both sides are culpable. Nicola Sturgeon said they shouldn't politicise it, but she's politicising it by pointing out that in Scotland that's less of an issue. That they cut the issue of, um, you know, uh, allowing dangerous people early release. So they're all playing games with it, and that's to be expected. It's we're in the middle of an election campaign, I don't think you can't politicize something like this. I mean, when people say it's not the time to talk about it, it is. It's precisely the time to talk about these things. It's about a bit like that attitude in the United States. Whenever there's a mass shooting, oh, it's not the time to talk about gun politics, except that it is. And on that issue, I'll just say this. Had Usman Khan access to firearms, we wouldn't be looking at two fatalities, we'd be looking at maybe 20. And that's not to minimise what's happened. Two young people with the rest of their lives ahead of them have been brutally killed. So a lot of the details that are emerging of this case are definitely striking. Apparently, Usman Khan was involved in this program run by Cambridge University at the Fishmongers Hall. Fishmongers Hall is one of the medieval London livery companies dating back to 1310, which explains why one of those who intervened managed to get, of all things, a narwhal bone. So I imagine it's kind of a semi-museum format, and he took it up from this person, apparently a Polish national, took it from a mounted sort of platform within the building. Another strange thing that's emerged is one of those that intervened was himself a convicted murderer, and he killed a young woman in Kent, I think it was 15 years ago, who had a mental age of 15. Cut her throat. Now, to me, that's just as low as what the terrorist done. So I can understand her family not taking too kindly to him being portrayed as a hero on national newspapers. To be fair, though, I think this would have come as a major surprise to anyone looking into this that one of the heroes. I mean, it's a real philosophical question. How can someone go from such a despicable act as murdering a defenseless young woman to, from any angle, a brave act of tackling an armed terrorist? It's possible that if they were both at this event, they had some sort of, they knew each other and there may have been some sort of personal animosity going on. Whether this guy, Mr. Ford, I forget his first name, is being brought back to the facility because he was on day release, apparently. It's just the circumstances of this one are pretty strange. The two victims were involved in prisoner rehabilitation, and the two victims were Jack Merritt, 25, and Saskia Jones, 23. Two young people with the rest of their lives ahead of them. The irony is, Jack Merritt was advocating for prison rehabilitation, and he would have been against tougher measures to prevent early release, and yet we see the tragic consequences of yet that. Johnson said that 74, there may be as many as 74 dangerous people out there who have got early release, but it's on his government's watch. And again, the parole service will say it's not their culpability. Someone somewhere made the decision for Usman Khan to be released. And Khan himself apparently had approached officials wanting to be de radicalized. So he himself saw that he had a violent tendency. And yet he was interviewed on I believe it was the BBC not long ago claiming that he wasn't a terrorist. Well, yeah, you really proved that wrong, didn't you? Um, I mean, this will not be the last such attack. And like I say, it's, two fatalities, three people wounded, no more word on those injured. Initial reports are saying 12. It's now been narrowed down to three. But there's rightly a lot of praise given to those who intervened. And the fact that one of them is himself a killer, it's a very strange moral quandary. I mean, how do you go from murdering a young woman to tackling a terrorist? It's just one of those moral mazes, really. But I think there's a few things need to happen. Firstly, there needs to be an urgent review of this insanity of early release. And of course, there's going to be politics played by both sides. This is one of those things that the parties need to get together and say, yeah, we just need to use common sense here. And those who advocate leniency, well, this is the result. I think some people are beyond reform. Usman Khan was clearly a very violent, dangerous individual. He should never have been released. Um, and if changes aren't made, then it won't be long before we see another such attack. I mean, we're a country of 66 million people. There are going to be dangerous people out there, and The target is likely to be big cities, most likely London, but any big city, Birmingham, Glasgow, Liverpool, any big city is potentially a target. Leeds, there's any number of venues in all our big cities that could be a target, but London is just most likely. The good news is we're not seeing the sort of attacks, at least not in the capital, to 7/7 bombings. It may be that we don't see that scale of attack again. That doesn't minimise what's happening here. So we need to urgently review this early release situation. We need to be absolutely candid about the problem, which is pan-Islamist extremism, and we need to call it by name. I mean, I don't criticise anything Corbyn said in this case. He's praised the police, he's criticised how they release, but Corbyn still will not usher the words Islamic extremism. Yet if this was a far right attack, as we saw after the mosque attack in 2017, Corbyn is very specific about that. So, when people call him a terrorist sympathizer, this is a man who has called Hezbollah his friends. This is a man who will not usher the words Islamic extremism. So, I'm sorry, but you're not convincing me that Corbyn doesn't have a very shady record when it comes to terrorism. Of course, he's going to condemn the attack. I don't criticise anything that he said. He done the right thing. He praised the police. He criticised the early release, and he acknowledged that Usman Khan was a dangerous individual. But Corbyn, if he's an aspiring prime minister, needs to acknowledge the ideology here. Johnson does, but then we're getting into that. This comes back to this ridiculous way that Islamophobia is throwing around. Talking about Islamic extremism is not Islamophobia, and the regressive left need to learn that. Because if they don't, if you cannot talk about the problem, it's never going to be solved. I mean, we talk about far right extremism, we talk about the mindset of blood and soil nationalists and everything that goes on there. Good. But we need to be absolutely candid about the nature of pan Islamist extremism. And that means that those Muslims who say, oh, it's got nothing to do with Islam, they are guilty of putting up a barrier to dealing with this, because if you cannot talk about the ideology candidly, if you cannot acknowledge that this is part of Islam, that these young Muslim men see themselves as dedicated Muslims, then it's not going to be solved. And unfortunately, there are other Usman Khans out there right now, and any one of them could be planning another similar attack. And it may not be on the scale of the London bombings 14 years ago, but clearly it can still cause damage. But at least we don't have the American situation of readily available guns, because if we did, like I say, it wouldn't be 2 fatalities, it would be 20. So those are just a few things to think about. Let me know your thoughts.